Mr. Bromberg, could you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
World War II, 28th Infantry Division, as a prisoner of war interrogator.
And what was your rank?
I went in the Army as a sergeant, became a second lieutenant.
And where did you serve?
From England to France to Belgium to southern France to Germany.
Okay. Can you tell me where you were born?
Hamburg, Germany.
And when did you come to America?
In September 1938.
Okay. Okay, and why did you come to America?
Well, I was going to be drafted in the German Army. My father was a federal judge, and he managed to get 4 boys we had get out before we had to get in the Army.
Okay. So then, when war happened here and war was declared, were you drafted or did you enlist here?
I volunteered.
Did you have to be a citizen?
No, I was not a citizen. I became a citizen in the Army.
Okay, so as long as you were living in the United States, you could serve in our armed services?
Yes. Well, I was married to an American girl,
Oh, I see.
and I was waiting to become a citizen. And I was in basic training with the 94th Infantry Division in Camp Phillips, Kansas, and that's where I was naturalized.
Why did you pick the branch of service that you did?
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I went to the reception center, and the man asked me what I could do, and I said I speak 3 languages fluently. I can type and I can take shorthand. He said, just the man we're looking for. He wrote down INF.
Oh, okay, so they placed you right away where they wanted you to be.
I said it.
Was your basic training difficult for you?
No.
Were you treated the same as everyone else? I'm thinking it must have been a little...
Well, I've been watched by the FBI previously when I was living as a civilian, and they had been interrogating me, and they knew who I was, and I noticed in the first week in basic training there was a man sleeping next to me in the barracks who was the first sergeant. We already had one first sergeant, so everybody wanted to know what he was doing there. So after a while, everybody said he was leaving. Everybody said, well, he was watching you.
So you gave me some initials of what you were. Can you tell me what it stands for, what your assignment was?
Initials or a name?
The
INF is infantry.
Oh, infantry. Okay. When did you get your assignment to be an interrogator?
Well, my brother was for the interrogation center in Camp Ridgely, Maryland, and he managed to get me transferred to go to school there. It would take about a year to become a prisoner of war interrogator, and we practiced there on live prisoners. And then, of course, they were short of German-speaking people, so I became a prisoner of war interrogator, went overseas, and attached to the 28th Infantry.
And the 28th was called the Keystone.
Keystone
right?
Division.
It was the Pennsylvania National
National Guard, that's right.
Where were you sent overseas? Where was your first?
England.
In England. Had you been there before?
No.
No. And what were your first impressions?
Of the Army? Or England?
Well, yeah, both.
Well, it's a little frightening experience when you first get in, but I adjusted pretty well, and I became a staff sergeant when I was going overseas, which made it a lot easier than as a private. So when we got ready to move into France and Normandy, I was pretty well acclimated to what I was going to do, and I was ready to become an interrogator.
Were you, you already knew at that point that you were going to be an interrogator?
Yes.
Is that true? How long were you in England before you were shipped to France?
About a month.
A month.
Yeah.
Were you part of the invasion?
No.
No.
No, we landed about 3 weeks after the invasion.
Okay. Did you have adequate supplies with you?
Oh yes, we were well equipped.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I might tell you that my first prisoner was the first sergeant of the Africa Corps, which was the elite German unit. And he was brought to me, and I was going to interrogate him. And the first thing he said, we're going to tell you nothing. We're going to drive you Americans into the sea. I said, okay. I got into my jeep, my driver, and a guard, and we went up to the bluffs of Omaha Beach. And there you could see thousands of ships as far as your eyes could see. I mean, there's no end to it. Unloading troops and guns and equipment, tanks, artillery. And the man took one look at it. He says, the war's over.
Okay. Did the Germans, you were an interrogator, but you must have gotten into some of the fighting. Is that true? Were you involved in any fighting?
We were just on artillery fire. I was not actually an infantryman. I was kept about a few hundred yards behind the lines.
Okay.
My job was to interrogate prisoners immediately to give information to the company commanders, so we were not very far behind.
Okay. What little reading I've done about that division, they must have fought very, very fiercely. And in one of the reports that I read, the Germans called them the Bloody Bucket. Does that ring a bell with you?
Yes.
Because
To the Red Keystone.
Because they, just persevered no matter what.
Well, I was in 5 battles. I got 5 battle stars, and from Normandy all the way up to Germany, and we had a lot of casualties.
Yes, very heavy casualties. Can you tell me how you got the Bronze Star?
Well, I got a prisoner who told me that in Hurtgen Forest, which is one of the big like a black forest, it was in France or Belgium. And he told me that if he would talk to the company commander, they would surrender. So I talked to the colonel, and he said, well, for the purpose of talking to the company commander, I'm going to have to give you a promotion. You're a sergeant, they won't talk to you.
Oh,
So he temporarily made me a captain. Then I had to go through a minefield, which wasn't too pleasant.
no.
I walked through the minefield, and we had a loudspeaker up there to ask the company commander to come out, and the colonel agreed all artillery would stop during this experience. So he came out, and I talked to him for about 20 minutes, and unfortunately one of the Nazi officers was visiting, attended this discussion. So the captain got scared, and he said, well, I can't do it. I said, if you don't come, we're going to kill all your men, and you'll be responsible for it. And the political officer scared him to death. So he said, well, I can't do it, but I went back through the minefield. I had a tripwire on it. I managed to get my foot out of it. So I went back, and of course the fighting started again. And during the night, lots of prisoners, lots of Germans came. So
Surrendered.
I got a Bronze Star.
Oh, okay. You also received a Purple Heart.
Yes.
Was this at the same time?
No, that was during the Battle of the Bulge.
Okay. Can you tell me what happened there?
Well, we were outside of Bastogne. This is a little bit of a story. I had told, I was an interrogator, and I got a prisoner who told me that the Germans would attack on December 17th with 13 infantry divisions and 10 armored divisions to break through between the British and us. Well, I took that information and went back to the commanding general and told him about it, and he says, you got to be kidding. He said, I'll be the laughing stock of the army if I take that back and it's not true. So I told him, General, it's my job to disseminate information, not to evaluate it. He said, okay. He said, well, you take a truck and go to no man's land. He told me where to go. You take a driver and a radio operator, and you listen to the conversation. If the Germans transmit in code, they're not going to come. It takes too long. If it's in a clear, they're going to start. Well, about 2:30 in the morning, they started coming. I said, tanks all over the place. I called the general. He says, I know. He says, get out as best you can. So I got back, and then we had to go through the woods that night without lights to get to Bastogne, and I talked to the general. He didn't say a word. He knew. He blew it. He was a good guy, but when we fought, we stayed there for a couple of days. People were running like crazy. Everyone was running away until the 4th Armored Division, Patton's Armored Division, liberated us. And that's where I got wounded. As soon as we moved out, I had a piece of shrapnel in my head. There was fighting was still going on. So then the medical officer gave me a proper heart in the aid station. And I put it in my pocket, and about a week later, the general summoned all those people who were wounded to the headquarters for a ceremony. And we all stood at attention. He came around and put purple hearts on everybody. And I didn't have the guts to tell him I already had one. So I kept my mouth shut. But I only got one.
Can you tell me, other than the Battle of the Bulge and Hertz, the other battles?
Hurtgen Forest, Hurtgen.
Which other battles did you fight in?
Well, we had the Siegfried Line. We were in Siegfried Line. We were in southern France at Strasbourg, and of course we went all the way through Germany. There's, you're talking about months and months of fighting. I probably interrogated upwards of thousands of prisoners.
Were you able to rest?
Yes. Well, you never do sleep, because as soon as the prisoner comes in, you have to get up. So you sleep for a few hours, and then all of a sudden it starts over again. But we interrogated people all the way from privates to generals. Because the first thing you do is separate the privates and the officers, and the only ones you keep are the sergeants. They know what's going on. They run the war. Everybody else it's not as nearly as important. So we interrogated a lot of sergeants, and in all the time I was interrogating prisoners, I only met one man who I couldn't break. One man. He was a second lieutenant, and I finally shook his hand. I said,
he was a German?
German officer, yeah. We rotated, interrogated him 24 hours. Over and over and over. He said, I'm not going to tell you anything. It wasn't hard to break a prisoner, really. I learned that it's when you're in a winning situation, they do want to tell you something. They want to get out.
Were the prisoners treated well?
Well, I don't know if I should talk about that. In the beginning, no. I remember the first time I asked Colonel Company Commander, I said, where are the German prisoners? And he said, I just sent you 10 of them. I said, I don't have them. So he called the sergeant over and asked him, what did you do with the prisoners? He said, I got tired of walking them. Otherwise, I would say the Americans treated the prisoners pretty well. They fed them, they make sure that they they have medical needs. I've never seen any mistreatment of prisoners other than that one.
Something that fascinates me, you lived in Germany for a long time.
19 years.
And here you are on the side of the enemy, in a sense, the Americans, in your old homeland. Was that difficult for you? Not really. If you have lived there before the war, and you realize that the mistreatment the Nazis gave to the population, whether they were Jews, whether Catholics, priests, or anybody Freemasons, anybody they didn't like, they would kill them. They would take them in concentration camps. And
feeling was we're going to liberate these people, and I'm going to help liberate them. Most of the crimes were committed not against the Allies, but against the German population. As a matter of fact, after the war, I received a letter from the War Department asking me if I would work on a war crimes trial as a translator. And I wrote a letter back saying I won't do that because I don't think the Allies have any business at holding these war crimes trials. They should be held by the Germans. That's where the atrocities were committed. And it turned out I was right. We picked up, when I was overseas, we picked up a German woman. You know, after the battles, I was transferred to counterintelligence for 6 months. We picked up a woman her name was Ilse Koch, K-O-C-H, who had made lampshades out of the concentration camp people. And if she's brought to a war camp trial and got 20 years. Then she was released, the Germans picked her up and hung her. That's how bad it was. So the people just hated the Nazis so bad.
So you never really had ambivalent feelings when you were in these, because everybody.
I didn't have to.
Nazi.
I had my options. When I was before I went to the interrogation training center, he said you don't have to go to Germany. You can fight in the Pacific if you object. I said no, I don't want to go Pacific. And
did the American soldiers ever treat you badly?
Never.
No, and you didn't sense any mistrust?
Never, never. All friends.
That's amazing.
They didn't mind that I have an accent. They understood that I volunteered. I made a lot of friends. Unfortunately, some got killed. One of my best friend got killed while I was there. We were in a jeep together, and he got shot in the head. We were ambushed. He got shot in the hand. I jumped out the other side and got away.
You, in your biographical form, talked about something that stands so poignantly in my mind, because when I was a teenager, I happened to see the movie about this particular incident. I remember it very well. It was the Private Slovik incident, and you did tell me that he was in one of your prisons, and you were responsible for him. The movie, if I'm remembering correctly, from a teenage girl's point of view, kind of glamorized the situation, and you ended up feeling so sorry for this man, as if maybe he didn't deserve what he got. So I would love to hear the story from you as to what actually was the case there.
He walked out of the front lines. He was in my regiment, one of my battalions. He walked in. He knew where the prison enclosure was. And he came to me with a piece of paper. It was written on there, I, Private Slovik, hereby declare you have deserted United States Army, and I'll do it again and again and again. He signed it. I said, you've got to be crazy. You know what they're going to do to you? He said, I don't care. So I went to see the regiment commander and said, what do you want me to do with him? He said, keep him for a week. Separate him from the German prisoners, but keep him for a week and talk to him. See if you can change his mind. If he does, we'll just send him back, forget about it. He and I lived together almost, day after day we talked. And he told me that, when I was a young man, I was in prison all the time. Either as a thief or assault, or you name it, any kind of thing you can think of, that I was always in jail. So the last time I came out of jail, I met a girl I fell in love with. And she told me that she would only stay with me, marry me, if I would go to work, which I did. He said, I went to work, and I lived with her, I don't know, a year, and he really loved her very, very much. And then he got drafted, and he didn't want to go. He said, my gosh, I spent all my life in prison. I finally went to work, went straight, and had a beautiful wife. So you didn't want to be killed. And I asked him, well, what do you expect? He said, if I have to get killed, it might as well be you. So I told the colonel that, and he said, well, we're going to have to send him back. And about a month later, he came back, was sent back to our regiment with an order that his own platoon had to shoot him. That was the first execution of an American soldier since the Civil War. Brother Colonel asked me to go there. I said, no, I won't go there. I don't want to attend this. I knew the guy well. I felt bad about it, you know. He finally gone straight, and yeah, he was a good guy. I mean, he was no prince, you know, but he was a good guy. He just didn't want to fight. He just wanted to go home.
So was it a case of just making an example of somebody?
Yeah, of course. But the idea that this old man had to shoot him nauseated me. Anybody else, if that has to be done, fine. But his own people, I don't think that was right.
Can you tell me one or two of your most memorable experiences, things that just stand out in your mind?
Well, the first one is when we shortly after we landed, of course I told you about the German sergeant here, but shortly afterwards I got a prisoner who told me that the opposing unit, which was a very poorly equipped, very poorly trained unit, consisted mostly of boys and old men, would exchange positions in the middle of the night with an SS armored division. I don't know whether you know the SS, what it was. And we were going to attack early in the morning at what they call nautical twilight, which is around 3 o'clock, where we would be murdered. So I went back to see my colonel, and he says, you better go see the general. And I called the general, and the general asked me to come in. I told him this. And he said, I don't believe it. The same guy who didn't believe the Battle of the Bulge. Says, General, I can only tell you what the man said. He said, I want to sit on the interrogation. I said, General, I can't do that. The man won't talk. It's against Army regulation. You can only interrogate one-on-one. So he said, oh, do it again. So I did it again, and I wrote it all down. And the general said, okay. So he had a number of artillery units attached, tank destroyers attached, armored unit, tanks attached. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, they opened up with all this, everything we got. Well, when next morning we got there, it was absolutely an unbelievable sight. Dead people all over the place, wrecked trucks and jeeps. Well, the general came back to me and said, called me and said, you know, Bromberg, I really appreciate what you did. You did a hell of a job. So I thanked him and said, you know, next time you have information like that, don't bother calling, and you just call me direct. So that's it, thank you. I went back to my unit, and then came the incident of the Battle of the Bulge, where I told him 10 days before the attack that's going to happen. And I think the reason he gave me a battlefield commission, because he was embarrassed to keep my mouth shut. I never ever told anybody in the military or the government the story. Never. When you get a prisoner, the first thing they ask you, how can you speak German so well, fluently? And I say, well, I asked the question, you answer. That's the end of this conversation. And the prisoner has to, if you want to get information, has to be a full bladder and empty stomach. That'll make it. That's when he wants to talk. And you don't let him. You don't feed him. You don't let him go to the bathroom. You give him full bladder and empty stomach. Usually they talk. And then if they still don't want to talk, we ask him, would you rather go to a Russian prison camp or an American? American prisoners go to America. Russian prisoners, you know where they go. It's one of these, you use that kind of an example to break them down.
Ones who were not part of the SS, and I imagine that was most of the soldiers who were fighting, were they against it? In their minds, were they against what was actually being done in Germany? Did you ever run across that, where they did not even believe in the cause that they were fighting?
Of course. They want to go home. They're like us. They have families. They want to live their lives. They don't want to be there. There's some crazy people wanted. We captured one guy during the Battle of the Bulge who was friendly to me, and he had a diary. He's a first lieutenant SS. In the diary it says, "War is fun once again. We're living of American Christmas packages." I had a Jewish sergeant in my team. I said, "Adler, he's all yours." His parents were gassed in a concentration camp. He's all yours. He went on and shot him.
What do you feel was your biggest achievement during your time in the service?
I think overseas and during the war and the battles, the ability to get good information and save lives as a result. Because if I got good information, I could tell the company commanders what's in front of them. If they knew what was there, how much artillery, how much mortars, how much infantry, what is the morale of the unit. If they know all that in advance, we can save lives.